Hey, I hope you're good. So this week I've got a Boss KM-60, which is an analog mixer from about 1979. And as with a lot of vintage Boss and Roland stuff, people have found ways to use them that perhaps isn't what they were originally intended for, and the KM-60 is no exception. So people use these as a drum processor, which is what I'm going to show you today. So the back of the mixer, you've got a jack input for each of the 6 of the channels. You've got an effects loop for each channel, which we're going to make the most of. And then you've got a stereo effect loop for the whole mixer. You've got a monitor out here. You've got your main right and left outs, and then you've got this additional set of left and right for stacking. So I assume that's if you're using more than one of these mixers together. And that's basically it. So let's have a look at the top. So on the top, we've got individual input gain here. And if you start to push that, it really starts to overload and distort in a fantastic way that we're going to make the most of. Then you've got a treble, boost and cut, goes +10, -10, and a bass, boost and cut, +10, -10. Then you've got this effects knob, which is for the master effects amount, and that's on each channel. You've got a pan, all the way to left, all the way to right, so that's great, so it's continuous, so you can put it anywhere in the stereo field you want. And then a volume on the end. Pretty simple. All the channels are the same. Over this side, you've got a monitor volume here if you're monitoring. You've got a low cut as well for the whole mixer, which I'm actually going to use, which is kind of useful. I think it cuts at about 100 Hertz or something like that. Power switch, this one's been replaced obviously. Then you've got the volume for the master effect, so that's what you've put in the loop back here. And you've got your master left and right out, and that's it. So welcome to Spaghetti Junction. Obviously if you were setting this up properly or permanently, you'd put this in a rack and do all your effects neatly. I've set it up quickly on the floor, so it's a horrendous mess. Sorry that you have to look at that. I've got an Oberheim DX. I've taken the multi-outs, apart from the cymbals, which I'm not using, and I've run them into the mixer. So I'll just play you the sound. And you can hear it's already starting to kind of saturate and distort a little bit. Obviously I could play around with the levels a bit to flatten that out, but it's starting to have an effect, but we're going to push that a lot further. So let's start with the kick drum. And let's push the input level. You can hear it's starting to distort. Push it as hard as it'll go. You can even hear like a little whiny artifact in there. You can push the EQ to make it even more extreme. But I think that starts to get kind of unusable, because if you start combining all your sounds and they're that processed, it's just going to be a complete and utter mess. So you've got to find a happy medium. So I'm going to use a kind of middle setting. And I think that's kind of pushing it enough. Moving on to the snare. I'm going to push that, push it quite hard. Sounds quite cool. Again, I'm going to keep it in the middle. I'm going to push some treble, a little bit of bass. And then I'm going to add some Dr. Scientist BitQuest. This is a fantastic pedal. I've not featured it all that much on my channel, but it's kind of a multi-effects that does all kinds of things. I'm going to use the flanger on it. You get some quite unpredictable effects out of it, which are really cool. Hi-hats. I find if you distort them, it just sounds like a... I don't really like that sound. You want a bit of definition in your hi-hats. So I'm going to push the top a little bit and take a bit of bottom out. I'm probably going to pan them left. And then I'm going to add a bit of Electro Harmonix synth engine. Let me just put that in the middle for a second. So that's a synth sound. It's kind of a latching thing where it grabs hold of a sound and holds it. But I've set it up so it's a bit like a gate, like a gated reverb, sorry. But you can hear that it misbehaves a little bit. And is a little bit unpredictable. So that's the sound I quite like. Moving on to the toms. mean, they're already starting to distort. Starts getting really silly. Starts to fart like nothing else. I'm going to back that out a bit, push a bit of treble. It's funny, you can really hear the end of the sample. That bow, and then cuts dead. I'm going to use a bit of Boss DM2 on this. Make it quite trippy. What's cool with this is you can do some, you know, panning, which is quite fun. So you can be a human LFO. Didn't use any cymbals, percussion stuff. I mean, it's starting to... I think the mix is a little bit in need of a service, but it's starting to get crunchy, even more crunchy. And again, you can pan things around. I'm going to put a bit of Boss CE1 chorus running at a slow rate, so you get some just modulation throughout it. You can hear that. Okay, so let's see what we've wound up with. So you can see it's transformed the sound, and in a way that would be quite difficult to do in your DAW, because you've got all this analog saturation, you've got everything running in and out of the same mixer, so it's all summed together. You've got all those effects, some of which are entirely analog as well, on the sends. So it's kind of a cumulative effect that is much easier to do on a device like this, on a hardware unit, than it is digitally. Okay, so same principle again, but we're going to use a sequential circuits drum tracks instead of an Oberheim DX this time. So let's see what that sounds like. I think that sounds quite a lot better than the Oberheim DX. It's kind of much more industrial, kind of grimy thing. So yeah, that's really cool. And for my last trick, I've got a Roland TB303 and a Roland TR707, classic combo, and I'm running them through the KM-60, so I'm saturating them, processing them, I'm adding individual effects on the individual channels, but I've also got an El Capistan from Strymon, which is a stereo delay on the master effect there, and I can send things to it individually as we go. So let's have a listen to how that sounds. And there we go. I think that sounds really cool. It's kind of more reminiscent of the kind of 80s acid recordings, not exactly the same, but it's starting to get that kind of grungy, saturated sound that you hear on those 80s recordings. So I think that's a really cool experiment to do. So there we go. There was my demo of the KM-60, not available in stores. I'm kind of in love with this thing. It allows you to transform sounds if you want. But it also allowed you to just kind of add a bit of grit to things, saturate them, and glue them together in a really nice way. It had a really pleasing sound to it. So if you find one of these, I recommend picking it up because it's a really handy bit of kit. As ever, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.